So for this video, for the MPJE, we're going to start talking about some regulations. And this, I believe, makes up some of the 3%. Check out the bulletin, but if you listen to the last one, in my opinion, this takes up a lot more. And they can incorporate this into so many questions, related to controlled substances and things like that. So you need to know these. So I'll start with development. You have your new drug approval process. So you can't introduce a new drug until it gets FDA approval. Your preclinical trials is where your animal trials are taking place to prove that the drug is safe with a potential for therapeutic use. So that's when you submit your investigational new drug application. So that drug is now an IND to start its phase 1 trials. So IND is a drug in the approval process. The FDA may terminate if they decide the IDA is too toxic, things like that. And this is all super expensive. So if something goes wrong, they stop. But the FDA allows for investigational drugs to be used in some situations. You can think about the recent Ebola. There was a missionary who was given an investigational new drug, and she survived, or he, I'm not sure. But some types of applications, there's your new drug application. There's the abbreviated new drug application. You'll see that with generics, pretty much. So if something has lost its permit, permit, then it can now become a generic drug. The generic manufacturer can submit the abbreviated new drug application. Patent's the word I was looking for. The supplemental new drug application, that's for typically you're changing something from the drug on the label, the formulation, the packages, the manufacturing, the indication. And I believe that's a tricky thing people use to extend their patents. So that's how some insulins long-acting have been not generic, is because they slightly change it, especially if something has come out as not safe, because then they can't make a generic of that anymore because something in that original was not safe. But it's new drug application, NDA abbreviated, ANDA for generic, supplemental for changing the label, you tell them what is new, SNDA. There's your BLA, the biologics license application. So any biologics have to go through that. Talk a little more about that. There's also, for animals, you add the A in front of it, so ANADA, the NADA. So most of your over-the-counter drugs will go through the NDA process, but they can go through the OTC drug monograph, and that's used if the prescription is already used OTC and is generally recognized as safe and effective, GRASE. And no adulteration, no misbranding, no misleading advertisements. But we can start PharmD caffeine because caffeine's already on the market, so we can PharmD caffeine and exclusively market the student pharmacist population, and that is acceptable. We would use the OTC drug monograph to get that. So phases of a drug trial, of course, preclinical or animal. There's phase 1, small number of healthy subjects. So that's going to be your just a healthy subject. They don't have the disease. That's phase 1. This just proves that determine the drug's adverse effects. So see what happens to these healthy subjects when they take this drug. Phase 2, your limited number of patients with the disease. The drug is intended to treat. So now they just particularly have this disease, so you determine the efficacy of the drug and the dosage at which you can test for your phase 3 clinical trial, which very expensive. And it's the clinical setting in a hospital. They're usually double blind. The clinical trials are typically what we read about, you do journal clubs on. Next is your phase 4, post-approval clinical studies. So after it's approved, they find things that come out about it. The national drug number, I talked about in the last video, the NDC. Every drug has one, including your OTCs. And I broke it down for you. So let's talk about production and marketing. So there are the compendias, which I've mentioned, the USB and F. So a drug must meet all standards or is considered adulterated or misbranded in the USB and F, United States Pharmacopedia. For labeling, there is a difference between label and versus labeling. So label is the display of written, printed graphic info upon the immediate container of any article. Labeling is what's also included with that, all labels and other written, printed, and graphic material. It's a broader application than label. So your FTCA prohibited acts and enforcements. The FTCA contains a summary of prohibited acts. Major offenses, of course, being adulteration. So anything that messes with the purity of the product. And then your next being misbranding. So it must include, or this includes labels. You have to include your ingredients, or it's mislabeled. Any commercials, advertising. If you use the wrong language, if it's a label in English and it's not an English-speaking country, that's misbranding. So something of note about advertising. So if it's wrong, that's misbranding. And for your over-the-counter drugs, that's the Federal Trade Commission that handles that. Your OTC. Anything that's a legend drug prescription is FDA. That's who handles that. And these are like very strict liability. So if you get in trouble for adulteration or misbranding, it's pretty much, hey, you did it, you're guilty. I think they can do warning letters, and even the bosses can get in trouble here. It's a very, you messed up. This is the penalties. So product recalls, you see this a lot. It's definitely gonna have a question on this. Class 1 is that, it can cause serious adverse health consequences, including death. 2 is like temporary or reversible health consequences. And then 3 is not likely to cause health consequences, but these are all reasons to recall the drug. A manufacturer is responsible for notifying sellers of the recall. So you have that first class mail urgent drug recall, and and I don't actually work in a pharmacy, but I assume now they do emails and things like that for recalls. OTC drug labeling, non-prescription drug labeling must be consistent with the FDA monograph. Contains layman's terms really that people can understand. There is professional OTC labeling. So what if a drug is both OTC and prescription? There are some of those. That's like ibuprofen. But your labeling for anything OTC needs to be user-friendly. Have adequate directions for use. Have black box warnings and things like that. And even your legends need that, but it has to be very good for the customer to read. So unit dose labeling. This is prepackaged and pre-labeled for direct administration. You see these in hospitals. If you are a tech in a hospital, it's pretty much all you ever see. And there's required information on that, drug name, quantity of active, and ease of dosage, and dosage unit, expiration dates. So 1 year or manufacturer date if earlier. And I believe if you find one without a BUD, you consider that expired, no like conservative date. Lot number, any special instructions for storage and administration. So warnings, if it's habit forming, DEA symbol if it's required. Barcode that signals the manufacturer info, number of dosage units. And note for your med packs, your beyond use date is no more than 60 days from the date preparation. So what's not on this unit dose label? NDC numbers are not on there. Your BUD is manufacturer, packager, distributor, the names, those are all there. So biologics, which you would apply for with the BLA, the biologics license application, but these are genetically engineered proteins derived from live human or animal cells, and you can identify these. If it has U, it's human. In the drug, UMOB, typically adalimumab. There's the ZU for human eyes, the trastuzumab, zumab, sorry. And there's even the XI, infliximab kind of things, and there's exceptions to that. I assume on the test you're probably pretty clear what it is. The biologics can also come from animals and microorganisms, like Botox. Would have to go to the BLA since it's produced by Clostridium botulinum. But yeah, highly regulated. There are biosimilars, which are biologics approved based on proving it is highly similar to the FDA approved biologic. Like no clinically meaningful difference here. Let's see, marketing regulations to prevent patient harm. So your package inserts, patient package inserts, but your package inserts are for healthcare workers basically. They must accompany the drug product and contain indication, use description, dose form, strength and administration, box warnings, CIs, warnings, precautions, ADRs, DIs, special populations, references, clinical pharmacology studies, and studies, how it's supplied, how it's stored, how it's handled, patient counseling, especially for contraceptives, estrogen-containing drugs. That's, the patient counseling, that's what triggered those. There's the CMI, Consumer Medication Information. It's written info that accompanies every new prescription. It's pretty standard. Your medication guides must accompany drugs that pose a serious threat and significant concern to patients. There's over 200 drugs here. Think like antidepressants, the warning for death, your NSAIDs, because GI bleeds, amiodarone, things like that need med guides. I believe the test will tell you, like, hey, this drug needs a med guide, you didn't get it. That's misbranding. So high-risk drugs contain the black box warnings, sometimes a patient package insert, things like that, but these aren't always enough. That's why we have these programs, the REMS programs. So it's FDA required special patient safety procedures. And example would be like iPledge with Accutane. You have to do the REMS. And then box warning, black box warnings are similar, and they're typical drugs that lead to death or serious injury. You have your pregnancy warnings, and it's 2019. I think you still have to know both of them. So category A is adequate, well-controlled studies, no risk. B, there's no adequate, well-controlled studies in pregnant women, so use if clearly needed. C is a benefit outweighs the potential risk to the fetus. There's no adequate studies of females, but there might have been adverse effects in animals. For D, they know the drug could cause fetal harm, and X, it should definitely be avoided. But now there's the new warnings. There's new sections, pregnancy, lactation, and females and males of reproductive potential, which is the newest one. So what they did is pregnancy now has labor and delivery, the section. So new labeling, instead of labor and delivery and pregnancy being separated, it's one. Nursing mothers became lactation, and then they added females and males of reproductive potential. There is, for MedWatch, your FDA Adverse Reporting System, FDA Adverse Event Reporting System, FAERS, FAERS. And I think I'll cut that here for these regulations, and I'll make a part 2 for regulations.